on, guys? It is Jonathan back again with the weekly scuffle, and I'm here to talk about the biggest fight of the year, Terrance Bud Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez, and how I think this fight is gonna go, who I think is gonna win this fight, and honestly, how big of a show I think this is gonna be. With that being said, I think it's gonna be probably the biggest show of the year, at least pure boxing. I think Jake Paul versus Gervonta Davis has a chance to reach more casuals, but both the shows are on Netflix, so it's gonna be very interesting to see how much traction this gets from the mainstream media. I think a knockout finish would definitely bolster that. But regardless, I think only one of these fighters, funnily enough, is capable of getting a knockout, and that would actually be Canelo Alvarez. Simply because I think Bud showed in his last fight against Madrimov that his power didn't necessarily carry up to 154. And do I think Bud can go up to 168 and knock out Canelo, a guy who's never really been knocked down or knocked out before in his career? It's going to be a tough ask, especially when you have someone like Canelo who's been fighting people like Bivol, Kovalev, all these bigger guys, even Callum Smith. Like, you see the size of the guys that he's been fighting, even Berlanga, who was 195 on Fight Night or even more. I think Canelo has definitely ascended to a certain level where he is almost unbeatable. But then you come in with a Bud Crawford, a guy who is similar level skill wise, and I think it definitely gets to a point where it's just talent versus talent. Who can win? Who could come in with a better game plan? I think Bud definitely has avenues to win. I think Bomac has already stated that round 6 or 7 that Canelo does like to take off now. So he could re-energize himself for the last few rounds. That once that starts, that's when Bud's really gonna take off. So it's gonna be very interesting to see if that's actually their game plan, because I think Bud could definitely have success against Canelo. I'm just intrigued if the year layoff is gonna affect him in any way. I know Canelo's been more active, but at the same time, Canelo does have more wear and tear on his body because of that activity. But at the same time, he doesn't have the ring rust that Bud will have and the added weight that Bud will have. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see the speed dynamic between the two of them. I think Canelo's reflexes have always been sharp, and I think Bud, probably has the best reflexes in all of boxing, if you don't count in a way. But with that being said, I think it's going to be a very, very good fight. I think Bud is going to win a lot of rounds, and I think Canelo will probably end up hurting Bud. He will hit him with a punch that Bud has never felt before. And it kind of depends on if Bud could come back from that fight or from what I believe would be a knockdown if it were to happen. Because I think Canelo definitely has power to knock down Bud, who's coming up technically 2 weight classes, but it's more like 3. Regardless, I'm going to go with Canelo to win this fight. I think it's going to be a very competitive fight. I think more competitive than a lot of people think. But I think Canelo will eventually get a knockdown that will decide this fight. And it just kind of depends. I believe Bud will rank or rack up a lot of rounds. So it's going to be very interesting to see if he could recompose himself after getting knocked down, if he does get knocked down. So if that were to happen, it kind of just depends on how Bud reacts to that, because we've never really seen him in that type of position. So we're going to see how all this plays out. I got Canelo winning probably round 11 or 12 knockout. That's what I'm going to go with. TKO more likely. But with that being said, we'll see how all this plays out. I'll see you next time. Peace.